Hi, welcome. I hope that your Thanksgiving observance, in whatever form it may have taken, was peaceful, perhaps comforting, and at some level satisfying. As one who hesitates to put too much pressure on any single day or experience, nevertheless, the opportunity to focus on giving thanks is always a worthy endeavor, and frequently an uplifting one. As we noted last week, this year, our Thanksgiving weekend blended right into the first night of Hanukkah, prompting many reflections, gatherings, and recipes for Thanksgiving. There is something lovely about the confluence of our most positive American and Jewish identities that is probably worth exploring. For today, my thoughts have been greatly influenced by a teaching by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha. He has been gone over a year, to whom I have referred on many occasions. I find his thinking so clear, so compelling, and so meaningful that I frequently just want to share what he has to say. In terms of Hanukkah, he speaks of the light of Judaism rather than the light of the candles. The following is based on what he has to say. He begins by observing that historical events are often not completely understood when they occur, that their true meaning may only be understood in retrospect, many decades, if not centuries later. He affirms that the meaning of Hanukkah has certainly changed over time and is understood today quite differently than when it actually happened. He writes in part, at one level, the Hanukkah story is very simple. From the days of Alexander the Great, Israel was under the dominion of the Alexandrian Empire of the Greeks. If I am not mistaken, this is just as an aside, the Greeks under Alexander were quite liberal and tolerant in terms of the supervision of that empire. In other words, Alexander allowed the various nations and people that came under his rule to continue to practice their faith and culture as they were accustomed to doing so, as long as they behaved loyally towards Alexander, his rule, and his empire. This tolerance eventually faded. And the empire was broken up into various sections. In the 3rd century BCE, Israel came under the control of the Ptolemies, who were based in Egypt and Alexandria. Then during the 2nd century BCE, Israel came under the dominion of the Seleucids, who were based in Syria. One Seleucid leader in particular, Antiochus IV, who modestly called himself Epiphanes, meaning God made manifest, decided to force the pace of Hellenization on the Jews of the land of Israel. Among other things, he forbade the public practice of Judaism. He erected a statue of Zeus in the temple and offered swine before it as a sacrifice, in a desecration of Jewish values that Jews of the time called the abomination of desolation. This clearly would not have happened under Alexander's enlightened rule. An elderly priest called Mattatyahu or Matthias and his sons and their supporters, known to history as the Maccabees, rose in revolt against this religious repression. Over the next 3 years, they waged a brilliant guerrilla war and eventually scored a momentous victory over the Seleucids, reconquering Jerusalem and bringing it back under Jewish sovereignty. They cleansed the temple and rededicated it, lighting the great menorah, the candelabrum that stood in the temple, for a celebration lasting 8 days. You might notice that there is no mention of a miracle of oil lasting for those 8 days. Let us pause for a moment for our break to breathe. With this cliffhanger of a story, with thoughts of a military victory and the cleanup that followed, that restored our ancestors to their city of Jerusalem, to their temple, and their religious freedom. So let us assume our comfortable positions for breathing, sitting in a chair, lying on the floor, standing if that is your choice. Let us take an inventory of release. We can go top to bottom or bottom to top. I tend to start with my head, with my jaw, my neck, my shoulders, all the places that are prime candidates for stress, are prime candidates for release. Let's lay our hands in our laps and let go of the tensions in our tummies, in our lower bodies, in our thighs and knees and legs and toes and feet planted firmly on the ground. Let us shake off as much of that stress as we can. It will be there waiting for us when we resume. But for now, let us let it go. Closing our eyes or letting them softly gaze in the distance. And let's take that first breath together. And let us fill up all the corners, all the spaces inside of us, all the closed down crevices, internal closings that create barriers, possibly to hurt, to the cold, to surprises, to unwanted news, whatever it might be. For now, let's let it all go. And feel our breath entering our entire bodies. From the tops of our heads, between our ears, down to our fingertips, our bellies, and even imagining the breath traveling down our legs into our toes. Let us feel that fullness, the comfort of it. The health of it. And then let's concentrate on the letting go. And we can pause for just a few seconds on the release before we feel the need to fill again. And let us just focus on that wonderful breath, that gift. It's a daily gift. It's a second by second gift. It's a 24/7 gift. Let's just stay with it. We may be aware that we are in the midst of a Hanukkah celebration. A time when our people was victorious against great odds. That is today. That is right now. Because Hanukkah is right now. And we can feel a certain pride certain fullness when we breathe in. And then release again. The story of the military victory without the miracle is the story of Hanukkah as captured in history in the first and second books of Maccabees. But that is not how the story was ultimately told within the Jewish tradition, as it was ruled that the two books of Maccabees and others under the same title should be called Sfarim Chitzoneim, apocryphal works, and they were kept out of the Bible. The Hanukkah story that is told instead is a very different one with a powerful message. The Talmud tells us that in the first century, in the last days of the Second Temple, a rabbi called Yehoshua ben Gamla established a network of schools throughout Israel. The result of this was that from the age of 6, every child in the country, presumably every male child in the country, received a publicly funded universal education. This was the first education system of its kind anywhere in the world, and also a clear indication of the now familiarly Jewish commitment to education and to ensuring our children are literate in their heritage. According to the Talmud, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Gamla's memory is blessed because without his intervention, the Torah would have been forgotten in Israel. Without him, there would have been no survival of Judaism and ultimately no Jews. What Rabbi Yehoshua ben Gamla and the other sages understood, and was not understood at the time of Hanukkah itself, was that the real battle against the Greeks was not a military one, but a cultural one. At the time, the Greeks were the world's greatest in many fields. They were unparalleled in their advances in art, in architecture, in literature, drama, philosophy. Even today, their achievements have never been surpassed. But Jews nonetheless believed, and surely history, our history has borne out, that there is within Judaism, within ancient Israel, and still within our heritage today, something special, something worth fighting for. Judaism, with its emphasis on the sanctification of life and the belief that every human being is created in God's image, holds eternal truths that we could not abandon. This was the unique distinction between the culture of the Greeks and the world of Torah and Judaism. As a result, Jews have always known that the real battle is not necessarily fought on the physical battlefield with physical weapons, but rather in the hearts and minds of future generations. So Judaism and the Jewish people became a faith and a nation, no longer focusing on its military heroes, but on its spiritual ones. It became a civilization rooted in texts, in teachers, and in houses of study. We became the people whose heroes were teachers, whose citadels were schools, and whose passion was learning and the life of the mind. The end result was that Judaism would survive and thrive throughout the centuries, whereas ancient Greece, the Greece of Athens, the Greece of Alexander the Great, declined. In fact, it was only a short time after the events of the Hanukkah story that Greece began its decline and Rome rose to take its place. That is the message of Hanukkah. And to articulate our story, the rabbis created a fiction to focus in a rather beautiful and symbolic way on just one tiny detail of the original chain of events. In order to light the cleansed candelabra of the temple, they could find only a single cruse of oil, enough to last a single day. That one cruse of pure, undefiled oil was found by the Maccabees among the wreckage and defilements of the temple, just enough to light the menorah until more oil could be sourced. Almost 5 centuries after the military events of Hanukkah, they asserted in the Talmud that the oil incredibly lasted for 8 days of celebration. One of the most interesting aspects of this shifting perspective from the original way of telling the story, without any miracle, to the current way, is reflected in the name of the festival itself. Hanukkah, from the word chanuch, means rededication. That is what the Maccabees did to the temple. They rededicated it, as described in the books of Maccabees. Yet over time, Hanukkah became connected to the word chinuch, a word meaning education. What we rededicated was not a physical building, the temple, but living embodiments of Judaism, namely our children, our students, the people to whom we teach and hand down our heritage and values. From being the festival of a military victory, Hanukkah became the festival of a spiritual and civilizational one. Rabbi Sachs believes this history of our history has a message for us all. It teaches us this fundamental truth, as relevant to our lives today as ever before. To defend a country physically, you need an army. But to defend a civilization, you need education, you need educators, and you need schools. Those are the things that kept the Jewish spirit alive, and the menorah of Jewish values burning throughout the centuries in an everlasting light. Often, what seems at the time to be the headline news, the military victory, is, in the hindsight of history, secondary to the cultural victory of handing your values on to the next generation and making sure that your children and theirs light up the world. For me, that is a message worth remembering, worth observing, and in fact, worth celebrating with lights and gifts and foods and all the elements that make an event joyful and memorable. Hanukkah was originally a very minor holiday. While its liturgical significance is still small, it looms in the imagination as a time of Jewish assertion in the face of the overwhelming power of Christian and secular culture. That, to me, is a great positive, especially if we are affirming our spiritual inheritance that continues to be a miracle of vitality, fortitude, and tenacity. This whole idea of the enduring power of spiritual truths as opposed to military might makes me think of some of the seemingly intractable problems in our world, and especially at this time, of a culture of might that has been most troubling in our country. It gives me perspective as well, that whatever physical force might accomplish is ultimately unsustainable without the underpinning of sound spiritual truths, faith, and belief. I know that there are systems of thought that profess to do that, but I believe that there are incontrovertible truths that cannot be subverted indefinitely. The light of equality, dignity, justice, and righteousness that we light on Hanukkah gives me hope against the darkness of what I perceive as ignorance, prejudice, bias, and mistaken perception. May the warmth and hope of this season illuminate your soul and inspire your heart. And let us breathe in that strength and that hope in these last moments of our session together. Let us reassume our meditative postures. Oh, and take in that breath. And possibly a yawn. That's very typical of meditation because we're releasing so much that holds us tense and at the ready. I think we're always at the ready for whatever might come at us. Let us breathe in. There are many miracles we might celebrate at this time. Breathing in and out is certainly one of them. But that we can trace a spiritual heritage that goes back over 2,100 years to the time of the Maccabees. And before that, another millennia at least. A millennium at least. That is a miracle. That is the miracle of Jewish existence that I do not take for granted for 1 second. So let us breathe in. Let us breathe in the knowledge of miracles. Right now, right here, in our bodies, in our minds. And let us breathe in as well. The light, the Hanukkah light, the spiritual light of those little candles, bravely, steadfastly, and beautifully, lighting up the darkness. Certainly of the winter nights, but far more importantly, lighting up our world with eternal values that we pray might be acknowledged one day by all of humanity. We breathe in hope. We breathe in light. And we breathe in miracles. I hope you will continue to breathe. I hope you'll continue to breathe no matter what, but I hope you'll continue in this meditative mood, even as I bring our time to a close with this reading for Kislev. That's the Hebrew month in which Hanukkah falls. Today is the 25th of Kislev, the day on which this is being recorded. It is entitled The Harmony of the Chanukiah, the Chanukiah being the Hebrew word for menorah, The Harmony of the Chanukiah by Suzanne Sobransky. It was originally published by Ritual Well. One candle lights another, and darkness is dispelled from the surrounding area. One candle lights two others, and the brightness reaches beyond what is near. One candle lights three others, and the closest corners are no longer dark. One candle lights four others, and the walls begin to shine with illumination. One candle lights five others, and the room begins to feel warm and inviting. One candle lights six others, and people begin to reflect the candle's glow. One candle lights seven others, and people farther away are attracted to the light. One candle lights eight others, and the world begins to take notice of the brilliance. 9 candles now burning harmoniously together. They have the power to dispel darkness. They have the power to shine light into our world. They have the power which comes from building one upon another, working together in harmony, achieving the brightest light they can shed. We can become like those candles. We can be candles igniting the flame of one another, candles shining brightly together, shedding a light which casts all people out of darkness and into a brilliant, better world. May this week be one of light and hope and aspirations, of recognizing the small miracles with which we live every day. God bless. See you next time.